Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, guys. Today we're going to continue. Remember that video I made about Hadith criticism, Hadith absolutism, and absolute rejection and relativism. So I told you my position is Hadith relativism, meaning we have some criteria of accepting or rejecting Hadith. Okay, so today we'll go further and discuss some rules, the rules of Matn criticism, by this paper. I found it very interesting. It breaks down the entire history of what happened by Dr. Jonathan Brown. You should have known him from the Akin Institute. Anyway, this the rules of Matn criticism. Okay, Matn is like content. Okay, remember these two words. Matn is content, meaning what is the thing talking about exactly, and Isnaad is the chain of narration, narrators, the individuals linking it to the prophet or the person that you're interested in, the chain. That is the isnad. Now this paper is very helpful, and I'll show you the four rules of one of the scholars, Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, and we'll just go over it together. Okay, so are you going to reject hadith or not? Now before we start, let me just quote something for you so that you have it at the back of your mind, to show you that if you see someone saying that they are rejecting a particular hadith, it's not necessarily that they are bad people or something like that. It's just, it depends on who you are. It depends on, do you have any criteria? Are you just going to accept something because of the narrators, the chain of narrators? And it will go over many things, by the way. What is the difference between a muhaddis and a jurist? Okay, we'll go over all of that. But before that, let's just see one particular saying here. Okay, look at this saying. It says, the sin of believing in a false document is not much greater than disbelieving the truth. I want you to soak that in. It means that if you, let's say a narration comes to you and you reject it, okay, you disbelieve it, and if it was true, that means you disbelieve in the truth, right? Is not much greater as believing in something that is false. So if something is false and you go and believe it, it's just as bad as rejecting the truth. Do you see? So it says the sin of believing in a false document is not much greater than disbelieving the truth. So hold that at the back of your mind. The next time you want to just accept everything, what if it's false? And you're attributing something false to the prophet, something illogical, and we'll go over some of those criteria anyway. Now let's go back to the paper. Let me just read the abstract of the paper for you. So it says here, okay, in an effort to avoid the subjectivity of individual reason. Remember, one of the biggest reasons why people remain absolutist, meaning they will accept everything, is because of this subjectivity. Like, and I'll show you, when you see the rules, you'll be like, yeah, anybody can just come and say, I reject this one, I reject that one, I reject. Who's going to say when should you reject and when you shouldn't reject? Who is going to do that? That is the main reason why people remain absolutist and they accept everything, because the other alternative, it will be something very subjective. But in this paper, you will see like there are still some rules inside. Inside, even the guys are accepting everything, there are still some rules that they talk about that is very subjective also. So to me, you shouldn't be scared of subjectivity. You should just have principles that make sense to the people, and people, if it makes sense, people are going to accept it. Okay, so let's just continue. So it says, in an effort to avoid subjectivity of individual reason, Sunni Islam elaborated a method of hadith criticism that subordinated evaluating the meaning of a report to an examination of its chain. So they try to subordinate checking what it really means, and then they just check the chain. Okay, with the 4th century, meaning 4th century Hijra, epistemological compromise of Asharism. However, Sunni Hadith scholars adopted rationalist criteria of content criticism that included explicit rules for rejecting Hadith because of their meaning. So, like in the 5th century, many scholars started coming out and criticizing Hadith for its content, not just its chain. This resulted in a strong internal tension within Sunni Hadith criticism from the 5th century onwards, with one and the same scholar upholding rigid rules of content criticism but not employing them or even rejecting them in application. Okay, and we'll see that later, because see, you can have rules, but when do you apply it? That can be a problem also that can later happen. So let's continue. The inherent subjectivity of content criticism resulted in different Muslim scholars either rejecting or affirming the same hadith. Okay, some scholars were much more inclined to reject a hadith out of hand because of its meaning. So some scholars, they don't care about any isnad. They just, what does it say? Okay, and I have a saying here that we'll also check later. Like, what is the hadith saying? That's what they care about. They don't care who said it, or most like that. Okay, because of it. While others were willing to extend a hadith more interpretive charity. So there are some hadiths that you think is problematic. Some scholars will be like, we can explain it. We can find a way to explain it. And funny enough, who were the main people that were doing this? Guess what? They were the Sufis, the Batiniya. Those guys, they can explain anything. Give them the most problematic hadiths that you think this is problematic. Even the Salafis will say this is wrong. These guys can come and explain it. You see? So it turns out to be that the people that are actually accepting all hadiths, sometimes it's not what you think. It's not necessarily the Salafis or the hadith, al hadith. It's actually the people that can explain any hadith no matter what. You see? And it was shown in this paper. By the way, I'm not going to go through everything in this paper. I just want you can go and find it yourself on Academia. You know that that application. You can download it, Academia. Then you find Jonathan Brown or any other scholar you want. Okay. Okay, so it says more interpretive charity. Some scholars were trying to do that. The tension created by the subjectivity of content criticism emerged in unprecedented relief in the modern period, when science and modern social norms presented an unmatched challenge to the interpretive awe in which premodern and attribution to the prophet, whatever. So this is the abstract of the paper, showing you that the reason why the problem is subjectivity and reason. How do we tell people when to reject hadith or not? Okay, so that's the first part, introduction. That's what I wanted to show you guys. Introduction part. Now let's go to the next part. 361. I'm going to, at first I want to show you another saying, okay, by one of the scholars. We are just reviewing it randomly, guys. Okay, 361. Okay, so listen to this saying by one of the scholar, mostly the recently hadith scholar Ahmed Al-Gumari phrased it as a final conclusion of his work on forged hadith. Okay, so this is one of the scholars. You can check him up. He says, "Unzur ila maqal, wala tanzur ila man qal." Okay, he says, look at what it said. What is said. Do not look at who said it. Okay, so look at what is said. Do not look at what is said. Don't look at who said it. Okay, so this is one of another principle. Now let's go to Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi. It's 4 principles of rejecting hadith. Okay, so this is it. Okay, in this work, Al-Khatib explains that there exists an entire category of hadiths that are immediately clear as forgeries on the basis of their content alone. So some of the scholars started saying that, see, there are some hadiths, when you see them, they are just clear as day that this is good. And there are some, when you see them, they just clear that this is problematic. Imagine a Salafi. I read, one of my Salafi friend, I read a hadith about talking about that when you are lost in the forest, that you can say, Ya ibadallah agisuni. I just told him that there's hadith like this. And then he's like, no man, this is problematic, this is weird. He had a kind of intuition that there's problem with this hadith. And guess what? When you went to check the Salafis, they will say this hadith is problematic. While the other guys, they are willing to say, no, it's not problematic. The Sufis, for example, they will not necessarily have problem with this. So it shows you that there's this kind of subjectivity. Whether you hadith you do hadith criticism or not, everyone does it somehow. Everyone has an intuition, a kind of what's called subjective way of saying this hadith is distasteful and this one is good. People have that kind of stuff. So let's just go over some of these reasons or criteria for rejecting hadith. So the first one, it says reason, akal. Okay, if reason rejects it as impossible, so if there's hadith that talks about something that is impossible, now does it matter the chain? So you have a chain. Let me see. I cannot write. If you have a chain of A, B, C, D, all of them, you've checked it, is authentic. Everything is authentic. There's no anachronism. Everything is perfect. But then it says something that is contradictory, that is impossible to reason. That it contradicts clear reason. It's impossible. Such as the notion that there is no creator. Imagine one hadith, it just says something absolutely ridiculous. But the chain is okay. Are you going to accept it? Of course, you'll be like, no, this is clearly impossible. So you'll be like, then this is one of these principles. If it clearly contradicts reason and it says something that is impossible, no matter what the chain is, we're not going to accept it. That's the first principle. The second principle, if it contradicts the Quran or the massively transmitted Sunnah, meaning mutawatir Sunnah, or the consensus of the Muslim community, then we are going to reject it. And by the way, when you see, I'll go to the next part where I'll talk about, is there a difference between Hadith scholars and the jurists, the people that actually apply Hadith? Then you see like there's a difference, because if you are someone that studied like usulul fiqh, you start to see some kind of similarity here. That some of the, like for example, Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, they have a kind of sentiment towards the consensus of the Muslim community. For example, Imam Abu Hanifa, what are the jurists before him? What did they say about some issues? He gathered some of these things. So the point I'm showing you is that you can see now, if you have now a narration that contradicts the Quran, okay, and if you are someone that is thinking a lot, like you start to see like this is actually very subjective criteria. They look objective, but there's nothing like objective, because who's going to say when it contradicts reason? What if it contradicts this guy's reason and it doesn't contradict this other guy's reason? Like, okay, if you say it contradicts the Quran and this other guy thinks it doesn't contradict the Quran, who's going to decide that? Okay, or the consensus of the Muslim community. Okay, so that's the second rule. The third rule, if you have a hadith, okay, transmitted by limited narrations, will address a topic that is so important for the Muslims that if the hadith were truly the Prophet's words, it would have been much more widely transmitted. So you have a hadith that is talking about an event or something very, very important, okay, that is so momentous, like what's it called? Okay, the first one is that it addresses a very important topic. Like for you, if you want to be a Muslim, the first thing you need to know, and there's hadith, a particular hadith talking about this, and nobody is narrating it. It's not mutawatir, or is very, maybe you have one hadith, what in usul fiqh you call it ahad hadith, especially Imam Malik. You have one hadith that is talking about this issue, but nobody's narrating this issue hadith. Then it doesn't make sense, because it should have been narrated more if it was important. If the Prophet really said it, it should have been narrated more. It shouldn't be something that we would just find somewhere in a weird place. So those kind of hadiths, they already have a problem, because they are talking about something important that couldn't have been missed by the early community. That's what this third criteria is. The last criteria is that if it talks about an event so momentous that it would have been so widely seen that one guy cannot report it and the other guys will miss it. Okay, so this shows you, like, remember that in the New Testament, in is it Matthew is it talking about the dead people coming back to life, the dead saints that they came out of their grave, like 500 of them or something, and they were walking the street of Jerusalem and people saw them. This kind of thing is so widely is an event that nobody can miss it. Historians of that time, they wouldn't have missed this. They would have talked about it, but nobody says anything about it. We just have it in the Gospel of Matthew, not even in the other Gospels. So this kind of thing is just false, because it's so momentous that you cannot miss it. Okay, so those are the kind of things. So these are the 4 rules that he has here. But you see, these rules now, how do you apply it? And even in this paper, the later Dr. Jonathan Brown is saying that even Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi, he never explicitly used these rules. He has these rules stated, but he never explicitly used it, because most scholars, they like to use the chain of narration to criticize. So if they will already, so me, I think this is what they are doing. They will do the content criticism. When they hear a particular hadith, they just feel like something is weird about this hadith, and then they will go and do the content criticism, because they just don't want to reject it based on the meaning. But they already have a disposition towards that particular hadith already. Whether it's contradiction reason, is saying something weird, then they will go and show some problem with the chain. Okay? And the opposite will be true. If they see a particular hadith that it doesn't seem problematic, then they will not need to do content Isnaad criticism too much. You see? So this is one of the things that I saw. Okay? So this is his own principles. So me now, I have something contradicts the Quran. For example, me, I think killing apostates that don't do anything, they are not calling towards kufr, they are not someone just changes religion. If someone just changes religion, nothing, he's not spreading a fitna or anything, should that guy be killed? If you believe he should be killed, me, I think it's contradicts the Quran. And that's why I reject it. That's why I made those videos about saying, because I believe the Quran is explicitly saying la ikraha fi din, وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ, and many other things. So I believe that's a principle of the Quran, that you are free to do whatever you like. Allah will judge you on the day of judgment, whether you believe or disbelieve. You are not a tyrant. You're not. It's not treason. It's not anything like that. I'm saying someone just change their religion. I think that contradicts the Quran. Okay, and many other scholars think like this too. That apostates shouldn't be killed because they change. It's not because they change religion. That's not the crime. It should be for something else. Okay, which one other brother contacted me actually, and he started explaining to me. Anyway, so that's my own principle, because I use this. Now, it doesn't mean, you see all these principles here, to use them is also subjective. It will be subjective, because what is reason? Okay, what is reason? Is it some kind of logic? What is like science comes into play later on, which is also shown in this paper. By the way, this paper is massively detailed. I think you guys should read it. It's a very, very good paper on this issue. Okay, it's not like tending towards a particular side. It's just broadening like and showing you everything. Okay, I think it's very important. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. Now let's go to the part of two particular dichotomy or something like he made in this paper, 369. Let's go there. It talks about two particular hadiths. Okay, let me see. Okay, so look at this saying by one of the early Sunni hadith scholar, Ibn Qutayba, died 276 Hijrah, so 3rd century, very early. Okay, when he was rebuting the Mu'tazila. So this one of the things about the Mu'tazila is that they are the ones that care mostly about the saying. What is this saying? They don't, because them, logic and everything. So they care more about what is this saying. They don't really do content criticism too much. Okay, so this scholar Sunni Ibn Qutayba is rebuting them, and he says this: we do not resort except to that which to which the Prophet ﷺ resorted, and we do not reject what has been transmitted authentically from him because it does not accord with our conjectures or seem correct to reason. We hope that in this lies the path to salvation and escape from the baseless whims of heresy. So this is what most people, that like the Salafis and many Sunnis, this is what they follow, because they believe, see, if something is transmitted to us authentically, we have checked the Isnaad, then if it doesn't make sense, or you think it is contradictory reason or something like this, then we cannot reject it based on that, because that will be us following our desires. And this is one of the attacks he made even against Imam Abu Hanifa's school, that these are the al-Rai, the people of opinion, that we cannot have our own opinion. They like to say, you know what, we have no opinion on this, we're just following it. But if you read detailed papers about even them and their own criteria, you will see that even them, they do content criticism. They do it, but in a subtle way. They just put it in the Isnaad. Okay, they do content criticism with the Isnaad, because see, it just doesn't make sense if you have a Isnaad that is correct and is saying something absolutely wrong. You cannot just accept it because of the Isnaad. The Isnaad can buttress the validity of a particular saying, but it just doesn't mean that the Prophet said it. That's just, I don't think anyone can say that just because of the Isnaad. What if you say something, because the Isnaad can be correct? Imagine I take a chain from somewhere and then I attach it to a particular hadith. Okay, it doesn't mean the Prophet said it. It just means that we can believe it. Okay, so anyway, that's one thing. Now let's go to the part where, so he's also in this part, he's talking about that many people that even have those criteria, they often don't use it as much, or they use it very subtly. Okay, now 369, where is this part? Okay, so now we talk about the tension between subjective reason and submission to claims of revelation with hadith corpus. The part I want to show is that, okay, it says here, consider the following two reports. The first is a well-known prophetic hadith that we will refer to as the hadith of cringing. Now, the hadith of cringing, we will talk about it now, dating from at least the early 3rd century. It is narrated by the successor Abdul Malik ibn Sa'id from Abu Hamid and Abu Usaid, and says that the Prophet ﷺ said, listen to this, the Prophet ﷺ said this: if you hear, according to this narration anyway, if you hear a hadith that your heart accepts, that your mind and body are at ease with, and you feel that it is acceptable to you, then it is even more acceptable to me. If you hear a hadith that makes your skin cringe and your heart or mind turn against it, and you feel that it is inconceivable by it to you, then it is even more inconceivable to me. If you don't already see the problem with this hadith, this hadith is just so subjective, because now it says if there's a particular hadith that my heart accepts, and there's a particular hadith that my heart rejects, I don't like it. If there's one that I like and I find myself inclined towards it, then the Prophet is happy with that. And if there's one that uh, I don't really like, is weird, I find it cringy, then it is even inconceivable to the Prophet. Do you see? Now, this hadith is the hadith of cringy. Now, let's go to the second part. I actually like this what Dr. Jonathan Brown did here. This hadith is called the hadith of cringy, which means that it's very subjective. You can already see it, okay? So the second hadith is hadith, what did he call this one? What is the name again? Okay, command to charity. The second one is command to charity. Okay, so this one is, the second report is a companion statement that appears in mainstream Sunni sources from the 3rd century onward. It is attributed to both Ali ibn Abi Talib and Ibn Masud, and states, if you are told a hadith from the Prophet, think of it what is most fitting, most pious, and best guided. So he's saying that if you hear a particular narration from the Prophet, think about it in the best way, most fitting, and most pious. Okay, so both of these hadiths together, what does it show? The first one is saying if you don't like it, then the Prophet doesn't like it. If you like it, then the Prophet likes it. It seems to be, it will lead to like subjectivity, a lot of subjectivity. Now the second one is saying that if you hear a particular hadith from the Prophet and you don't like it, think about it in the best way, the most pious and the best guided. This hadith now is what the people use, like, okay, the guys that do interpretive part, so they will say, did you check the Isnaad, and the Isnaad is authentic? Then even if the meaning is problematic, we are going to interpret it away. We are going to find a way to reconcile it. The whole business of reconciling stuff, this is where it comes from. That, okay, since the Prophet, we know the Isnaad is correct, and that means the Prophet has said it according to them anyway. So now we have to just interpret it, find a way to interpret it. Now, this one is also subjective. Some people don't know this, because remember that hadith I told you about, Ya Ibadallah Gisuni or something like that. Some scholars don't think like it is fabricated. See, by the way, it's not just when the Isnad is 100%. Like, sometimes you might not get this 100% Isnad stuff. If you study hadith, what is hadith criticism even? Like, how do you check the Isnad? What if one guy is problematic in the Isnad? Does that mean the hadith is false? No, it doesn't mean the hadith is false. It just means that it's weaker, and it doesn't even mean that it's not sahih. So there are many things like you need to, it's deeper than what you think. So even this hadith command to charity, what if you give too much charity? At what point do you stop giving charity? What if hadith say something very Sufi-like? The Salafis will outright want to reject it, and the Sufis will be like, yeah, we have to extend charity here. And it gives examples of many hadiths of such that you'll be like, no, I'm not accepting this hadith as a Salafi or someone that's Ahlul Hadith or Sunni. There are some hadiths that are Shi'i. There are some hadiths praising Ali ibn Abi Talib and praising him too much. Those hadiths, the scholars say, you see, this is not is correct. Let me see if I can find in one of the phrases that was said about this. I'm serious. Okay, so the scholar is basically saying that, you see this hadith about Ali ibn Abi Talib, the Isnad is clear as the sun, but we reject it. There's even one about Imam Ahmad praising the Sufi people. And since those other guys already know the personality of Imam Ahmad, they are like saying, you see, Isnad is correct, but I don't think Imam Ahmad will say this. So anyway, showing you that, see, this whole business of this thing is a very subjective thing, and I don't think people should be scared of subjectivity and then accept everything. Just like me, I'm not saying everyone should reject, like we should reject all the hadiths. Of course not. Me, I'm much more inclined towards hadith criticism, okay, using some kind of principles, and I cannot accept everything absolutely, okay, because remember that thing I showed you. Remember this thing, this principle I showed you in the beginning. The sin, if it's a sin to disbelieve in a particular hadith, It's also a sin to affirm something that is not true. And how will you know if it's true or not? To me, Isnaad is not sufficient to know if something is true. We have to do content criticism. The content has to be in line with what is sensible to be attributed to the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It's something, and like in that video I was showing you, some scholars even go far that to say that, see, if you attribute some defect to the Prophet, whether the Isnaad is correct 100% or not, we reject it. Some Maliki scholars are like this. If you attribute some, like, you remember that satanic verses stuff, they rejected it based on this. The whole satanic verses, that some people try to reconcile it and interpret it. Some scholars just reject it outright, that no, this thing didn't happen. I don't care what this Isnaad says. So this shows you that, see, we need to do better than this. Scholars should come out and actually give us better principles, even though these principles are already clear. See, it's not like it's a whole big deal actually, but I'm just showing you. If you see me say something about I'm rejecting something, there's a reason. I'm not just rejecting it based on ahwa, okay? Because you accepting it doesn't mean it's true. You could be accepting something totally false. So you just don't want to do the work. I think everyone should get behind this and do their own job and do the job of actually checking the hadith more than just checking the isnad. Okay, it will save us a lot of trouble, a lot of explaining, because some hadiths will just reject them. Okay, and if you said, let people that will come later, if they find some hadiths problematic that we couldn't see, let them find it problematic. They are the ones that will hold on. They are the ones holding to their religion. It's not you. You are not living in their time. In the past, there are some things that were normal to them, but to us now, it's problematic. Okay, so what do we do now? Anyway, lastly, let's talk about okay, the last thing I wanted to talk about was the distinction between the muhaddis and the jurist. So there's this distinction that, see, the muhaddis, some scholars now said, you see, the muhaddis, the people that check this now, leave them alone, let them check this now. This is good. They said this is good stuff. This is their job to check this now. They are not in the business of checking the meaning. So the job of the muhaddis, the hadith scholar, is to check the isnad and authenticate the hadith and say sahih. So the next time you hear sahih, it doesn't mean it is true or something that we can use, because you will then find it in the jurist. The jurist, the ones that apply this hadith, maybe it's like a ruling, you will see that they don't agree. And that's why you have 4 schools, different methodology. It's not just the hadith. So go to a Maliki and quote him some hadith to come and believe it. Come and believe it in the Shafi'i way. He will not accept you, because it's more than just hadith. There's a whole baggage of how do you interpret this whole thing comprehensively. It shows you. So that scholar was saying that, see, I don't think if I can find it here, he was saying that, see, the jurist, their job is to do the content criticism. The muhaddis, their job is to check the isnad, and we shouldn't mix the two together. But if you read Jonathan Brown's other papers, you will see, like, the muhaddis, they don't think they are just doing isnad criticism. They think they are doing content criticism also. Okay, so I hope after this video you'll be able to learn something. So the best thing is actually you go and read the paper yourself. Go and read the entire paper. Okay, that's what I would say. It will give you like a much more understanding of these things. Like, just because something is sahih doesn't mean the Prophet said it. Okay, it just means the isnad is correct. If the isnad is correct, the application can still change, because you see that in the 4 schools and their principles of applying the rulings from the Prophet. Why are they different? Why don't you just understand the Sahih Hadith? Because there's a whole baggage of how do you interpret the whole thing. Okay, so I hope just before you go, just remember these 4 criteria. This is what I will make this video about. These 4 criteria that we listed. That's what me I'm using right now. That's what I'm trying to us. This is the principles of Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi. Okay, it makes sense to me. Okay, so the first one is it doesn't contradict reason. The second one, it doesn't contradict the Quran. Okay, the third one, if it's something important and it's not mutawatir. The fourth one, if it's something extremely important and it's not mutawatir. Okay, the fourth one, if it's something momentous, so what is an event that cannot be missed and nobody talks about it, and then one hadith comes and is talking about it. So those are these 4 criteria. The first 2 is what I'm actually much more interested in. Okay, because that's what I have access to more. Anyway, so let's end this video here, guys. See you guys later. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.